Today, we're going to dig into a strategic guide called The Mega Frontier. It's got this really interesting, super focused idea for tackling a massive global challenge. The whole thing boils down to zeroing in on what it calls mega frontier people groups. Let's break down what that even means. All right, let's just start with a number 7,120. What on earth is that? It's not the number of coffee shops in my city, I can tell you that. But this figure is at the absolute heart of the strategy we're about to unpack. So here it is. According to the source, that's the number of what they call unreached people groups in the world. I mean, just looking at that number, you can feel how big the challenge is. But that really begs two questions, right? First, what does unreached actually mean? And second, how in the world do you even start to tackle a number that big? Well, the guide's whole strategy begins by defining its terms. I want you to think of it like a giant funnel. The goal is to pour that massive number in the top and systematically narrow it down to find the most strategic places to focus. So let's start with that first definition, an unreached people group. Now, the key here isn't just that there are very few Christians. The real point, the critical detail, is the lack of a viable, indigenous Christian presence. In other words, there's no local, self-sustaining community there to carry the message forward on its own. Everything really hinges on that idea. And then, the funnel gets even narrower. The guide pulls out a specific subgroup it calls Frontier People Groups, or FPGs for short. These are, like, the most isolated of the isolated, and they have a really specific definition: 0.1% or fewer known followers of Jesus, and absolutely no internal momentum for growth. From the guide's point of view, this is a state of extreme spiritual isolation. And boom, just like that, our huge number gets a lot smaller. Out of those original 7,120 groups, the guide says that almost 5,000 of them fit into this more specific frontier people group category. You can already see the focus sharpening. But that still leaves us with a pretty big question. Even with this sharper focus, almost 5,000 groups is still a lot. It's overwhelming. So where do you possibly start? This is where the guide really drops its big idea. And that brings us to the absolute heart of this whole guide, the mega frontier people groups. According to the source, this is the strategic key that unlocks that overwhelming question of where to begin. Okay, get ready for this, because this is the central finding of the entire guide. Just look at these two bars. On one hand, you have a tiny number of groups. We're talking just under 300. But on the other hand, those groups represent a jaw-dropping 1.6 billion people. It's an absolutely massive concentration of the population in a tiny fraction of the groups. This chart here just drives that point home in a different way. Look at that. Those roughly 300 mega groups make up almost 80% of the total FPG population. That means the other 4,700 or so groups, they only account for about 20% of the people. The imbalance is just staggering. So here's the big takeaway, the core insight of this whole thing. The challenge isn't spread out evenly, not at all. Nearly 80% of the population is packed into just under 300 groups. The guide argues that if you focus on this small, strategic set, you're actually engaging with the vast majority of the issue, at least when you look at population. Okay, so we get the what, these mega FPGs, but why focus on them? What's the thinking here? Well, the guide lays out this really interesting theory it calls a strategic domino effect. And to really get across why these groups are so important, the guide uses this incredible metaphor. It says they are the spiritual mountains of the Great Commission, massive, unmoved, and yet crucial to God's plan for all nations. The idea is pretty clear. If you can move these mountains, the whole landscape is going to change. So here's how that domino effect is supposed to work, broken down into 3 steps. Step 1, you concentrate all the focus on the mega FPGs. Step 2, the theory is that this intense focus will spark major breakthrough movements. And then step 3, and this is the crucial part. Those breakthroughs are expected to have a ripple effect, opening doors to thousands of other, smaller groups. It's a theory of strategic contagion. All right, so we've seen the data, we've heard the theory, but what does the guide actually want people to do with all of this? What's the point of this framework? Well, its purpose isn't to be some dusty academic paper. Its stated goal is to be a practical tool, something simple, clear, and strategic that anyone, from a single person to a huge organization, can use to focus their efforts. And it boils it down to 4 specific actions it's asking readers to take. to pray with real intention for these specific groups, to advocate boldly for them, to mobilize other people to join the cause, and finally, to listen personally for how they themselves might play a part. So really, the guide's whole message is about creating this sense of urgency, but also opportunity. It's trying to say that by looking at the data this way, what seemed like an impossible task becomes a definable, strategic set of goals that, in its view, are finally within our grasp. And all of this leaves us with a really fascinating final thought, doesn't it? This guide is basically applying an 80-20 rule to a global mission, and it makes you wonder, could this kind of data-driven, hyper-focused strategy be a key to tackling other massive global challenges? It's definitely something to think about. That's it for this breakdown.